The changing landscape of love. A look at the ages of marriage through time. In most societies, age determines whether you can say, "I do." But, the age isn't consistent across the globe. The age of marriage varies as much as our cultures, traditions, and laws do. In most places, you'd think reaching adulthood automatically means you're ready for marriage. But, that's not always the case. Although in a majority of places, the age to legally marry aligns with the age of adulthood. Many allow younger lovebirds to get hitched if their parents or a judge gives a thumbs up. And if you're wondering, why younger? Well, sometimes circumstances, like an impending baby arrival, influence the decision. Ideally, all babies need a mom and a dad. So, what happened in history? How did marriage become a legal and sacramental state? Let's begin at the beginning of all marriage laws, with Emperor Augustus and Lex Papia. This wasn't just any law, it was the Roman version of compulsory marriage. The Lex Papia was introduced in 9 AD to encourage and strengthen marriage. It also included provisions against adultery. The laws were, of course, designed for the upper classes. Augustus was not interested in what the peasants did. He wanted to breed a strong senatorial class that he could control. Few, in fact, were actually punished for failing to marry, because compliance was easy. Adultery, on the other hand, particularly for upper-class women, could result in abandonment, or even death. The law prescribed 2 types of prohibited sexual activity. The first was adultery, which the law defined as sex between a married woman and man other than her husband. And stuprum, sometimes translated as rape. In the Republic, chastisement of adulterous wives was the role of the paterfamilias, the male head of the household. Under Augustan law, the punishment for adultery became the burden of the state. On discovery of the adultery, a man was required to divorce his wife, who henceforth would be considered a whore. Adultery could thus lead to a complete loss of honor for the woman who was condemned to the rank of prostitute at the bottom of the moral order. "12 was considered the marriageable age for Roman girls. 14 the age for boys, particularly in the upper classes, who tended to marry earlier than plebeians. A marriage ceremony was commonly held although there was no legal requirement for such. In law, all that was required was for the bride to be led to the groom's house. The groom did not even have to show up, and could be wed in absentia. The conversion of the empire to Christianity brought little change in marriage practices. But, the Church, from the 4th century onwards, planned to intertwine the divine with the romantic. Their mission? To sprinkle some holy water on marriages and transform them into sacramental unions. However, the change was slow. It was not until the 9th century we see the first signs of change. No longer just an affair of 2 hearts, marriage ascends to be an esteemed institution. Think of it not just as 2 people saying, "I do," but as a union with a stamp of celestial approval. Finally, at the 1184 Council of Verona, marriage is officially declared a sacrament. Before this date in Europe, tying the knot was pretty freestyle. No grand churches, no priests, no grand rituals. If you were in love, you could just look into each other's eyes, anywhere, anytime, and declare you're forever. A moonlit garden, a sun-drenched beach, or even a cozy nook at home. The world was your wedding venue. So, in the Middle Ages, getting married was easy for Christians living in Western Europe. In England, reading the banns was introduced in 1215, when the legal age of marriage was set at 12 for girls and 14 for boys. Although the church tried to control marriage, couples didn't need the permission of their families or a priest to officiate. For engaged couples, having sex created a legally binding marriage. Another way to enter the state of matrimony was to give a wed. That is an item, usually a ring. A wed could be any gift understood by those involved to mean consent to marry. Legal records show people getting married in all sorts of places. On the road, down the pub, at a friend's house, or even in bed. Some couples added a light gloss of sanctity to proceeding by conducting their ceremony close to the church, but not actually in it. Instead, they tied the knot at the church door. There was no need for witnesses, and until the Reformation, there was no speak now or forever hold your peace. Although the medieval church upheld freely given consent as the foundation of marriage, in practice families and social networks usually had a great deal of influence over the choice and approval of marriage partners. Moving forward to the Renaissance. In some noble houses, marriages were indeed contracted at a young age for reasons of property and family alliance. But in fact, the average age of marriage was quite old. Marriage statistics indicate that the mean marriage age for the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras was higher than many people realize. Data taken from birth dates of women and marriage certificates shows that most were marrying in their mid to late 20s. The marriage age of men was probably the same or a bit older than that of women. By 1619, the time of sailing of the Mayflower from England, it was about 23 for women, and 26 for men. Even though the age of consent was 12 for a girl, and 14 for a boy. The reason for late marriage among laborers and the middle class was simple enough. It took a long time for a couple to acquire enough belongings to set up home. Young love had to be kept in check. If the two lovers were to survive in a world where subsistence earnings would not put a roof over their heads and food on the table. The policy of the Roman Catholic Church, and later various Protestant churches, of considering clandestine marriages and marriages made without parental consent as valid was controversial. And in the 16th century, both the French monarchy and the Lutheran Church sought to end these practices, albeit with limited success. Before 1929, Scots law followed Roman law in allowing a girl to marry at 12 years of age and a boy at 14, without any requirement for parental consent. However, marriage in Scotland at such a young age was in practice almost unknown. In England and Wales, the Marriage Act of 1753 required a marriage to be covered by the issuing of a license that required parental consent for those under 21. Or the publication of bans, which parents of those under 21 could forbid. In fact, in most of northwestern Europe, marriage at a very early age was rare. Scholarly examination of 1,000 marriage certificates from 1619 to 1660 from the Archdiocese of Canterbury show that only one bride was 13 years old. 4 were 15. 12 were 16. And 17 were 17 years old. The other 966 brides were all older than 19. Additionally, the church dictated that both the bride and groom must be at least 21 to marry without the consent of their families. In the issued certificates, the most common age of the brides was 22 years. For the grooms, it was 24. While European noblewomen often married early, they were a small minority of the population. And the marriage certificates from Canterbury show that even among the nobility, it was very rare to marry women off in their early teens. The American colonies followed the English tradition, but the law was more of a guide. For example, Mary Hathaway of Virginia was only 9 when she was married to William Williams in 1689. In France, the French Revolution did little to improve the lot of young women. The marriage age, which was like the rest of Christian Europe, was 12 years for girls and 14 for boys, was raised to 13 for girls and 15 for boys in 1792. Things improved slightly under the Napoleonic Code of 1804, when the marriage age was set at 15 years for girls and 18 for boys. In 2006, the French raised the marriage age for women to 18, the same as for men. This moved to 18 for both boys and girls, as the legal age for marriage without parental consent had become the norm in 158 countries by 2010. However, in 146 of those countries, state or customary law allows girls younger than 18 to marry with the consent of parents or other authorities. In 52 countries, girls under the age of 15 can marry with parental consent. Surprisingly, in the United States, the attitude to amending the legal age of consent remains lax. However, in recent years, several U.S. states have reformed their child marriage laws, including Virginia, Texas, Florida, Connecticut, Kentucky, Arizona, Delaware, Tennessee, New Jersey, Missouri, New Hampshire, and Ohio. Yet, in 13 states, it is still the case that there is no absolute minimum marriage age when all exceptions, such as parental or judicial consent, are considered. However, just as in medieval Europe, having a teenage age of consent does not mean people in the US are getting hitched in their teens. In the US, both men and women are marrying later in life. In 1973, the median age of first marriage was just over 22 years. 21 for women and 23 for men. By 2021, the national median age of first marriage had shifted to just under 30. Just over 30 for men and a little over 28 for women. In the UK the situation is much the same. The average age for women to have their first child also increased during this time. The average age at which people have their first child is now about 3 years younger than the average age at which they first get married. This highlights a significant cultural shift that has occurred over the past 50 to 60 years. In the mid-1950s, prior to the sexual revolution and the introduction of the Abortion and Divorce Reform Acts, only about 5% of babies were born to unmarried parents. Today, this figure stands at just under half, with 48% of all newborns born to parents who are not married. In the UK the situation is much the same. Almost 90% of men born in 1908 were married by the age of 40. The same was true of men born in 1948. Since then, however, the proportion of people marrying has been decreasing across all ages. Among men born in 1960, 78% were married by 40. For those born in 1970, the figure is 63%. A similar pattern is evident for women. This trend has been matched by a fall in the number of marriages, from 415,000 in 1970 to 241,000 in 2010. One reason for this is that men and women have been delaying the age at which they first get married. The average age at first marriage is now 31, compared with the 20th century low of 23 in 1970. Based on current trends, marriage will never be as prevalent, at any age, among those born in the 1970s and 80s as in previous generations. One explanation is the acceptance of cohabitation. As recently as 1980, only a third of people had ever cohabited before their first marriage. Today, the figure is 80%. This in itself is linked to broader changes in attitudes towards living arrangements and family life. In effect, the role of marriage as a necessary prerequisite to sex and having children has diminished greatly, leading couples to delay the decision to marry, or forsake it altogether. Well, that's it for today, folks. A huge, heartfelt thank you for joining me and for your incredible attention. Your support means the world to me. If you found value in today's content, please do me a favor, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to press the alarm bell so you won't miss any of the exciting new videos coming your way soon. Your engagement helps us grow and create an amazing community right here. And your feedback is always warmly welcomed and appreciated. Once again, thank you for spending your valuable time with me. I'm truly grateful for each and every one of you. So, until next time, take care, stay inspired, and remember, incredible things are on the horizon, and I can't wait to share them with you. Goodbye for now, and see you in the next video.